Good morning. Welcome to the Ephrata Foursquare Church online church service. We're getting close to phase 2. We're one step closer to seeing each other again. I just pray that as we're kind of losing our patience in our own homes, I just pray that we'd be reminded that we're always in the phase of going out and making disciples. So always be thinking of ways to reach out to other people as we continue to go through this pandemic. It's going to be great to see you guys. If you have any prayer requests at all, I encourage you to email Cheryl Brewer with them. Her email is cheryl@efcnet.org. That's CHERYLE at efcnet.org. And before we get into this service, let's pray. Dear Jesus, I pray for our members of our church family who are just eager for us to get back together. I pray that as we deal with the fear surrounding us on social media and with the conspiracy theories and all the political drama, I pray that you would just lift us out of that and you would remind us that first and foremost you love us and that you care for us and that we are all going to make it through this together. I pray for our leaders who you've put in place, and I pray that you would just continue to give them the guidance and the strength that they need to make the best decisions for us. I pray for our students who are struggling through this difficult time as they get closer to graduation. I pray that you just be with them and that you would encourage them. And I pray that you would give our pastor a good word today and that it would just reach out to people that lifts and glorifies you. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's get into worship.
Promises remain. In Lamentations 3:22 through 25, the word of the Lord says, "Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him." verses 16 through 22. No king is saved by the size of his army. No warrior escapes by his great strength. A horse is a vain hope for deliverance. Despite all its great strength, it cannot save. But the eyes of the Lord are on those who fear him, on those whose hope is in his unfailing love, to deliver them from death and keep them alive in famine. We wait in hope for the Lord. He is our shield. He is our help and shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. May your unfailing love rest upon us, O Lord, even as we put our hope in you. And should this life bring suffering, Lord, I will remember what Calvary has done for me, both now and forever. You're so good to Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now
Good morning, family. Today we are moving to our 6th message in this series on emotional spiritual health. And I think from the title you can tell that it's pretty serious stuff. And so I just kind of want to launch into it right away and trust that God can use it and that we can come away encouraged from some of our difficult situations, some of the things that we face. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, I think most of us are pretty familiar with it, if not through the Bible, through the old song by the Byrds. To everything there's a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, and one of those is a time to weep and a time to laugh. We all experience loss. For some, it's catastrophic loss, death, sickness, betrayal, abuse. For others, it involves the natural order of life, loss of our youth, unrealized dreams, kids moving, empty nesting, the loss of a job maybe. But for the one who's going through whatever it is, it can still be very painful regardless of the type of loss. And oftentimes we can't control the circumstances, but I think we can process and even eventually manage our emotions in the middle of all of the loss, and then even experience God through it. I think so many people have been trained to avoid the bad emotions. As a little experiment, you could ask yourself, what is your family script when grief strikes? In other words, what does it historically look like when you're blindsided by great loss? I want to list some ways that we tend to suppress our grief so that we don't have to face it or we don't have to walk through it. Obviously, denial. We simply don't necessarily deny that something has happened, but we deny and try not to give it permission to have impact on me. And so there's that sense of denying its ability to affect me deeply. There's minimizing that it's bad, but it could be worse, or it could be, it's not as bad as it could be, and those kinds of things, and we kind of downplay it to make ourselves feel better. Sometimes we blame others for our loss. A big thing happens, and we know, well, that's because of them. It's their fault. It's their problem. Or we blame ourselves. I'm just the worst. This is all my fault. I should have never ever X, whatever it is. I shouldn't have allowed this to happen or that to happen or that kind of thing. Sometimes we rationalize, and we try to minimize through rationalizing the pain and the grief and the deep sorrow and the stuff that's in the pit of our stomach, and just kind of say, well, if this, then that, and we try to do the math and that kind of thing. For some, it's intellectualizing, and we try to make sure that we put every peg in the right hole, and we try to put everything in its place, and we try to make sense out of everything, so that there is a sense of control, and that I can manage it in my thinking. It can't get beyond what I'm able to contain within my thinking. Sometimes it's through distracting. We move into grief and we try to distract ourselves. It can be, of course, through alcohol or drugs or bad relationships or purchasing big things or taking a trip or any number of things that we try to just distract ourselves from that. For some, it ends up where we become hostile. We actually you bristle and people can't even get near you, and the pain is so great and you just don't know how to handle it. And so you lash out at people that are trying to love you and help you. And that's kind of the way that our world works, is how we think about things. You got to suck it up. I have to suppress it. I have to get over it. I have to get past it. I medicate. I have to just be strong. I have to be strong through all this. And then I think another convoluted layer that we can add is what I call the spiritual veneer. Okay? And that's the idea that regardless of the circumstance, we put on a happy face. We put up the front. Paul McCartney has a great song on his album, Flowers in the Dirt, entitled My Brave Face. And basically it's about his girl has left him and he's faking it in public. But at the same time, when he gets home, he keeps breaking down because of it, putting on the brave face or the strong face. One of my favorite albums by an artist named Michael Johnson, and it was an album entitled The Michael Johnson Album. And there's a song that became a pretty big hit for him entitled Bluer Than Blue. And some of the lyrics are, after you go, I can catch up on my reading. After you go, I'll have a lot more time for sleeping. And when you're gone, it looks like things are going to be a lot easier. Life will be a breeze, you know. I really should be glad, but I'm bluer than blue, sadder than sad. You're the only light this empty room has ever had. And life without you is going to be bluer than blue. It's the veneer, it's the brave face, it's putting up fronts. And after all, Christians have got it made because we have faith. And faith says we are always strong and we're always on top of it. And so what we do is we quote these well-known verses that we're supposed to be living. Philippians 4:4. Well, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. 1 Thessalonians 5:18. In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. I think I've mentioned before when my mother was going through cancer, one day she kind of broke through and she said, I don't get it. I'm trying to be thankful for this, but I just can't. And I was able to tell her, it doesn't say for everything give thanks. It says in everything give thanks. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're dealing with, you can give thanks. What can I be thankful for? You can be thankful that Jesus has bought you and redeemed you and has died for you and lives again for you and has changed your life and has saved you and is preparing you for eternity. That's a pretty big thing to be thankful for. Listen, the idea of pain and suffering and the idea of exhibiting faith in God are not mutually exclusive. Let me give you the antithesis of this idea that we're always supposed to be happy. There's a great verse in Proverbs. It kind of makes me laugh. 27:14, Proverbs says, he who blesses his friend with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, it will be counted a curse to him. When Debbie and I first moved here, early one morning, about 7 o'clock, I woke up and I could hear some rustling outside of our bedroom window. Now the shade was drawn, but the window was open a little bit. And then all of a sudden, we heard a bunch of pots and pans banging, and then they started singing some kind of a song and the whole thing. And I don't like being awakened that way, all right? But here's the thing. It was their way of welcoming us. They were blessing us, but they weren't. Whoever blesses his friend with a loud voice rising early in the morning, see, that wasn't really a blessing. So we cursed them and we went back to sleep. No. Actually, they had brought donuts, so we invited them in and all was forgiven. But here's the thing. Suppressing emotions is to suppress your humanity. See, you were made to feel emotion. That's a thing that God has given you. It's a gift that he's given you. That's been kind of the thesis of these messages so far, is that emotions are real and they're a good thing that God has given us, but how do we express them in a healthy manner? And how do we be in control in a godly way? And that suppression is associated with God. And a lot of people don't think it's safe to not be okay at church. If you suppress grief and loss, you close off an entire area to God, to yourself, to others, and eventually you're going to spring a leak. Emotionally and mentally, you're going to spring a leak. It has to come out. See, and that kind of thinking is actually closer to Stoicism than Christianity. The Stoics were a group of people back in the day. And Stoicism basically has to do with consistent tranquility of the mind. Okay? I don't over-emote. I don't give you the privilege of seeing me emote. I'm stoic. It's what that means. In other words, you stand strong to whatever emotional pressures are closing in on you. You suck it up, buttercup. That's what it is. Now, what do the scriptures say about grief and loss? I would say the Bible paints an honest picture about grief and about loss. It's explicitly stated in our verses for today. To everything there's a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. There's a time to weep and there's a time to laugh. And I wish that I could tell you that life will always be smooth sailing. But I've been on one too many boats where I lost my lunch because of stormy weather. And that's not the way it works. And while I'm keying in on our response to our own grief, I think there's a couple of good general reminders for us as well. First of all, there are times of grief and pain in every life. Nobody's exempt. Nobody is rich enough to avoid it. Nobody is clever enough to get by it. There are times of grief and pain in every life. It's going to happen, okay? But the second idea is that when the grief isn't yours, make it yours. Romans 12:15, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. We would do well in our own emotional health to be able to help others in that and to join people in their grief. Sometimes I think it's easier to join people in their grief than it is to join people in their rejoicing. Sometimes that little jealousy bug gets in. Why did they get the promotion? Why did they get this great thing? And I'm just kind of meandering along. But when grief isn't yours, make it yours in the godliest of ways. Loving people and caring for people by partnering in that moment. Let me give you some biblical examples of venting honestly. People venting honestly over their own loss. Okay, Jeremiah. In Jeremiah 12, this is a guy who God sent out, and for over 30 years, he had zero response to this message. No fruit. Nothing. 30 years. Can you imagine pastoring a church for 30 years? No response. And so he has, in chapter 12 of Jeremiah, a lot of questions for God. He just opens up and unloads and is being very honest. He just vents to God and goes, I got questions, buddy, and you're going to listen to them. How about David? He says in Psalm 55:4, my heart is severely pained within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. It's basically his usual complaints about the wicked prospering, etc. This is a guy that was so honest to God in every way. And he would just tell God, my enemies are after me all the time. He goes, why don't you break their teeth, basically? Why don't you take care of these people? And he's just very honest about it. Job, we understand, chapter after chapter of Job being as honest as he can be about his condition, about those around him, and about God's inaction. What is going on? What's happening? Why are you this? Why are you that? He vents, and he's able to do that. Mary, in John chapter 20, is very honest about her grief and her loss over her boy, her son, her child. And she vents about it. Jesus himself. In John 11:35, it's the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. He was honest. He was open with his emotions. In Luke 19, he's coming into Jerusalem, and it says, as he drew near, he saw the city, and he wept over it. He wept over it. That's a pretty good precedent of honesty before God. I think that we would do well to more often weep over our cities. There are also biblical examples of expressing grief over the loss of others. Psalm 35:13, as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled myself with fasting. My prayer would return to my own heart. I paced about as though he were my friend or brother. I bowed down heavily as one who mourns for his mother. That kind of empathy. Job said in chapter 30, have I not wept for him who was in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? See, we have to allow ourselves to feel grief and feel loss. Even good losses. We grieve over good losses. What are good losses? Let me give you an example from our own church leadership here at EFC. If you're, I'm going to mention some names. If you're not a part of the church, just play along. When I first got here, the church council was a little, not split, but they were unsure of direction and of next steps and some of those things. And Ed Williams was here, and he was kind of, these are the words I used for him. I said, you've been on the shelf for too long. You need to be in the game. You have too much to offer. And we put him on our church council, and my goodness, the help that he was, and the stuff that he came up with, and the wisdom that he shared, and the burden he had for this church family. But then a few years ago, we lost Ed and Sherry, and they moved away, and that was tough. I don't know if they're going to listen to this or not, but we still miss you guys, you know. More recent years, Bruce Loringer was a guy, again on the church council, who always knew the right thing. He always knew like what the laws were and what the rules were and everything about and building and stuff. And the guy was he's a brilliant guy. And all of a sudden, he decides he's going to move to Alaska. That was a big, big loss. But they're thriving. They're doing great. Then, back in the day, Daryl and Mindy Wall oversaw our youth ministries, and God brought amazing fruit to that ministry. And they became the best of friends, and we were very close. And not too long ago, we sent them to pastor in Leavenworth. They're thriving. They're doing so great there. He and I talk almost every week, and they're doing so good, but it was a big loss for us. I hated it. Let me bring you up to date. Jim and Margaret Klein. They're going to be moving. I don't dig it. I don't like it. But it's really a really good thing for them. So it's a good loss. But I hate it. I don't like it at all. I mean, this really is all of those names I mentioned. This is family in the strictest sense of losing family. And those are huge losses for us. But there's a great gains for those who have moved into the next phase of their lives. See, grieving loss is part of being human. It's part of who we are, even when we try to deny it or reject it. The next idea in this section is that believers grieve very differently than others. We grieve differently than others grieve. It's actually very noticeable. Okay? 1 Thessalonians 4:13, Paul says, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. That's the difference. When we grieve, we are a grieving people full of hope. What's the difference? One day, God is going to end all suffering. That's it. And it's a sense of living that you and I need to keep in the forefront of our thinking. You need to live with a sense of transcendence if you're going to just not cope with life, just coping, but to live abundantly in this life. And in a way, we learn to live life with a peripheral view of potential pain and grief, that it is kind of hovering in our view. And I think that when we do that, we're actually better equipped to face the difficulties that are coming our way, because we prepare our hearts with the hope of heaven, that one day we'll be with Jesus forever. So that whatever we face today pales in comparison with the life to come. Number 3, let's talk about those who have entrusted themselves to God in times of loss. Who are people who entrusted themselves and said, no, I am going to trust God during this time? Joseph, in Genesis 50, you understand that his brothers all ganged up on him. They thought they killed him. He ends up being rescued, and he becomes the number 2 guy in the kingdom and all of this stuff. His brothers come to him because they're starving and they need help and they need food. And he says to them, it's me. It's me. And they get shook at first, like that's it. He's going to kill us all. But he said basically in verse 20 of Genesis 50, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about as it is this day, to save many people alive. What you did actually brought about this moment where I am saving the lives of hundreds of people. Mary, in Luke 2:19, it says Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. Now, this is not so much a loss, but it's facing the unknown. It's facing the fear. It's facing huge changes, which is kind of a loss if you're not good with change. And the angel comes, he says, well, here's what's going to happen, and you're going to have a baby, and this baby is going to be Jesus, and he's going to be God's son, and he's going to... Well, that's a lot to take in. And so she didn't immediately go on talk TV and talk radio and everything else. And she didn't just go to all her friends and start blabbing. She pondered it in her heart. She kept quiet between her and God. And she dealt with it that way. And then David entrusted himself to God in Psalm 55. Again, this whole thing about being attacked and all his enemies and all the inequities of his life. He says, as for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and noon I will pray, I will cry aloud, he shall hear my voice. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. He shall never permit the righteous to be moved. David chooses to trust God in the middle of all that. Again, we're back to Job. In chapter 19, essentially, after all the pain and all the questions and all of the unknown and all of the loss, he says something amazing in Job 19:25. He says, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God. See, there's this sense of grieving, but with an underlying sense of trusting and longing for God. And if we're going to be people of the Word, we need to begin to correct this cultural narrative that the world has laid on us, that we do well to suppress grief and loss. And if we're going to be honest with the scriptures and with the very way that we have been created, we'll come to understand that grieving is part of being human, that it's the correct response to loss. And that as believers, we grieve with the Lord, not alone. Now, what if our particular loss doesn't fit within the parameters of natural loss, the things I talked about earlier, old age, disease, whatever it might be, but rather that it is catastrophic and unbearable and comes and completely blindsides us. We see that this is easier said and taught than it is done. I admit that. Some of you have experienced unspeakable loss and pain and have been blindsided. Some of you may or may not know the name Jerry Sitzer. He's a great teacher, great theologian. He's a professor at Whitworth University in Spokane. Amazing guy. In the fall of '91, he and his wife, Linda, along with his mother and their 4 children, who ranged in ages from 2 to 8, were driving in their minivan on this lonely stretch of highway in rural Idaho. And they had been visiting a Native American Indian reservation as a school project for their 2 oldest children. And about 10 minutes into their drive home, he noticed a car traveling toward them really, really fast. Of course, it ends up the driver was drunk. He slowed down at a curve, but the oncoming car, traveling at like 85 miles an hour, crashed headlong into their minivan, killing his mother, his wife, and his 14-year-old daughter. In that one moment, 3 generations of women in his family are gone. And he watched them die in his arms on a lonely highway. The driver of the other car was eventually declared not guilty and set free because it couldn't be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he and not his pregnant wife, who also died in the accident, had been driving the vehicle. And so he would at first deny and suppress his grief before eventually discovering his own need to face grief and loss head on. 3 years later, he would document that unbearable but transformative journey in his book entitled A Grace Disguised. Let me read it for you. Catastrophic loss leaves the landscape of one's life forever changed. I question whether experiences of such severe loss can be quantified and compared. Loss is loss, whatever the circumstances. All losses are bad, only bad in different ways. No 2 losses are ever the same. Each loss stands its own and inflicts a unique kind of pain. I discovered in that moment that I had the power to choose the direction of my life would head, even if the only choice open to me, at least initially, was either to run from the loss or to face it as best I could. The soul is elastic, like a balloon. It can grow larger through suffering. Loss can enlarge its capacity for anger, depression, despair, and anguish, all natural, legitimate emotions whenever we experience loss. Once enlarged, the soul is also capable of experiencing greater joy, strength, peace, and love. The decision to face the darkness, even if it led to overwhelming pain, showed me that the experience of loss itself does not have to be the defining moment of our lives. Instead, the defining moment can be our response to the loss. It's not what happens to us that matters as much as what happens in us. Darkness, it is true, had invaded my soul. But then again, so did light. And both contributed to my personal transformation. So let's let that segue into our fourth point. Grieving with God can enlarge your soul. Romans chapter 5, verse 3 says, not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. Now, hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. Job 42:5, he says, I have heard of you, talking about God, by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Enlarging the soul. I didn't think it could be possible, but God, I do see you. Everything closed in on me, and the grief and the pain and the loss. But over time, my soul begins to enlarge again in terms of your goodness and your grace and your mercy. And he says, I see you now. I see you for what you really are, and your goodness and your grace. So here's the question. How do we begin the process? How do we begin the process? Walking through the grief. First of all, listen to your heart. And I'm not talking about follow your heart. Okay, we've said before that the Bible says the heart is deceitful, it's wicked, nobody can understand it. But I'm not talking about your heart leading you. I'm talking about listening to your heart, understanding the pain, feeling the emotion, walking through it. Be aware of what you're honestly and truly going through. And when you do that, then the second thing is to face the grief or the loss for what it is. Okay? Face it for what it is. Be brutal about what's going on. This loss is too much for me to handle. It's bigger than I ever thought my life could see. And that might involve lamenting. Okay, that's a very biblical thing. It's all over the Psalms, especially Psalm 88, chapter 88. Okay, it's about lamenting. And not only is grieving human, I would submit that grieving is actually worship. In my grief, I begin to make God bigger, and I begin to elevate him, and I begin to trust him, and I begin to walk with him again. And then the third thing that you do is you wait in the mystery. You wait in the mystery. You don't get it, you don't understand it, but you wait in it, and you say, this is the way it is right now, and I'm going to wait patiently, and God and I are going to figure this out at some point. Walter Brueggemann has said that the Psalms can be divided into three types of Psalms. Orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. So there are songs of orientation. That's where we enjoy God and his creation and his blessings. Psalm 150, we delight in his goodness. We enjoy this rich sense of well-being. We have joy in him. Then there are songs of disorientation. That's those seasons of hurt, suffering, dislocation. These are songs that were written when the bottom falls out and we wonder what in the world is happening. This is that confusing in-between, that place where we so often feel doubts and resentment and isolation and despair. And then number 3, there are songs of reorientation. That's where God breaks in and he does something new. It's when joy breaks through our despair. Some of you might find yourselves in the middle this morning, the season of disorientation. And that's okay. It's all right. Don't try to don't try to extract yourself out of that. Let God do that and wait in that mysterious in-between for him. And then the last thing is that we embrace the work of God, embrace what he'll do in you over time. Trust him that what he is doing is rebuilding and refreshing and renewing and reorienting your life again. In other words, you allow the old stuff to birth the new stuff. Let God bring from that something new and redeemed and fresh. Now, let's go ahead and tackle one of the questions for the ages. Okay, this is one of the biggest questions, and Christians hear it all the time from non-believers. Why did God let it happen? Why did God let it happen? I'm going to tell you why God let it happen. I don't know. I don't know. And when I don't know, all that I feel like I have are spiritual platitudes, and they seem oftentimes so meaningless. Okay? I just have mental memes, just pithy sayings, and when I'm confronted with the present cruelty and brutality of loss, and I've been there, I have had to walk with people through terrible loss, children, family, a lot. So I'm just going to spare you what I don't know. Because really, and nobody likes this, the Bible doesn't seem to answer the why questions as satisfactorily as we like. But what does it teach us? It does teach us this. God is grieved by your loss. God feels every ounce of pain that you feel. So much so that he entered into our suffering in order to suffer with us. See, Jesus entered into our world fully aware of his human limitations. He pulled away from his family's scripts and expectations of him. And he pursued the Father's will, even when it was impossibly difficult. And the plan was so difficult that he experienced his own dark night of the soul. Where? In the garden, as he prayed in the garden. And sweat, as it were, drops of blood. And he said, God, if there's any way you can take this cup, in other words, this thing that I have to do, this cross, this death, please take this cup from me. And then when he was on the cross, hanging, dying, what did he say? He said, where are you? God, where are you? And yet he pushes through the grief in sheer love for the Father and love for us. Nicholas Wolterstorff lost his 25-year-old son to a mountain climbing accident. And in his book entitled Lament for a Son, he wrestles with the fact that he has no explanations for why God would have allowed that tragedy to happen. And at one point, he comes up with a very profound insight. Here's what he says. Through the prism of my tears, I've seen a suffering God. It is said of God that no one can see his face and live. I always thought this meant that no one can see his splendor and live. A friend said perhaps it meant that no one could see his sorrow and live. Or perhaps his sorrow is splendor. See, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. But before he did that, he cried. He cried. Before Jesus did the miraculous, the world was in awe of a God who cried. And what the world needs today is a church that can cry, that can grieve alongside each other, that can carry each other and be strength for each other in those moments. A people that can be real about loss and disappointment and suffering and injustice. We might never know why we're suffering. We may never know the why. We might never be the same after a loss. It could be that traumatic. But I'm convinced that God can enlarge our capacity to live if we allow him, if we invite him in, if we let him in. Jot it down if you would. We might never know why we're suffering, but God can enlarge our capacity to live if we let him. And I believe that our trials don't have to be a waste. If you listen to your heart, if you face your grief or your loss for what it is, if you wait within the mystery, and if you embrace God's work in your life over time, that he will work with you and he will work for you and he will always be with you. And he will take you from glory to glory, and he'll take you to a place of healing, and then he'll take you to a place of restoration and wholeness, and he'll take you to a place where you will use your loss in order to love and care for somebody else. Let's pray. Jesus, I want to pray for those that are grieving, those that are experiencing loss. Lord, it may be someone who is still grieving over an event that has happened 5, 10, 15, 20 or more years ago, and it still hurts and the pain is still very real. Jesus, I pray, whatever the situation, even if it's very current, that you would be the God of our hearts, that you would be the strength of our hearts and our portion forever. And that, Lord, you would bring about a brand new sense of rebuilding and refurbishing and renewing, and God, that you would use our lives for your best purposes. And that one day we would look back on that terrible loss and we would see the very fingerprints of God walking with us and loving us and holding us and caring for us. Please make that true in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. If I want to take care of a little business before I go. If you are not on our church mailing list and you want to be kept up with whatever's going on, especially in terms of when will we begin gathering again and when will we make some of those decisions, if you will just simply call 509-754-5205, and you can talk to Cheryl or you can leave a message and say, just if you would add me to the email list so that I can be kept current on whatever's going on. We are formulating a plan for next steps as we begin to go into phases, etc. And in the meantime, to let you know that our only goal is to hear what the Spirit would say to the church. Okay? There are no leaders or politicians that have the kind of authority that the Spirit of God has for us. And because of that, we are actually free to not walk in any kind of rebellion. We are also free to not walk in fear. We are free to walk in the Spirit. And so we're looking at a plan on how we can begin to move toward each other again, in stages probably. So be praying about that. Pray for us as church leaders, and pray that the Spirit of God would bring about a wonderful transition for us. And that before we know it, we would begin to see pockets of people again. I'm excited about that. I'm looking forward to it so much. God bless you. God bring peace to your life and to your heart. Have a great week in the Lord. You are much loved. God bless you.